Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that. But we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you. Hey, everyone. We made it to March. Enjoy this episode brought to you by Health Code. GETHLTH.com. They're doing great stuff. They have a great berberine product that I love that I'm using with my patients. And it has turmeric and anti-inflammatories and all that for us to recover from our hard workouts. Hopefully we're still doing those in March. And also they have their great shakes. Of course, the chocolate macadamia is my favorite. Also, they have their creamy vanilla. They have a vegan option with fermented pea protein, which is their claim to fame right now. They've really reached a lot of people with that. It's expensive to make that, but they're taking a bite to make sure they get that product out to people. So anyways, thank you for listening. Patreon supporters especially, thank you. Greatly appreciate your support. It's less than 1% of the listeners, so we hope that a few more jump on board there so we pay our guys and not have to take another sponsor, hopefully. But again, thank you and happy 2025 to you. Keep up the good work.
Discover a new path to wellness at Arizona Metabolic Health. Dr. Brian Lenzkes offers advanced medicine and personalized care, treating the root causes of your health concerns, not just the symptoms. Whether you're seeking direct primary care, effective diabetes management, or medical weight loss, with a holistic approach, our team is here to guide you every step of the way. Visit ArizonaMetabolicHealth.com today to learn more about our innovative health solutions.
When I stepped on that scale and saw the number 278 pounds, it was like a punch in the gut. I was just sick and tired of being fat, sick, and tired. I knew that I had to make a change. I started to read about the low-carb diet and I decided to give it a try. The weight started to fall off me. I added Health Code on a daily basis to my diet. It's a high-protein, healthy fat meal replacement that is simply delicious, and it's easy to make. And after I have one, I don't get hungry for hours. My strength has improved. My VO2 max has gone up 7 points. I have higher energy levels throughout the day. I want to be healthy enough to throw my grandchildren up in the air and go on hikes up a mountain with them. And I totally believe that Health Code can be an important part of that. I believe Health Code is the best meal replacement shake ever formulated. I wouldn't be taking it otherwise.
Try Health Code risk-free.
Hello and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I nabbed a good person here today. Hannah Warren, welcome. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and get to speak with you today.
I'm glad I get to share your story. I mean, this is amazing. I heard you talk with my friend Brett Scher, who we trained together back in the day. You kind of heard our history and to see what he's doing now with Metabolic Mind and what you're all doing, it's just amazing to me. It's so rewarding. Because of all the things I treat diabetes and hypertension and obesity. There's nothing like getting someone's mental health better, like getting that anxiety, helping to be a part of that, of getting anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia. And, in the early days, we saw that. And, the medical community thought it was absolutely insane that we would consider that lifestyle could have anything to do with mental health other than stress and depression and things like that, stress and anxiety and those kind of things. So Hannah, share your story. It's pretty remarkable and amazing. And I want people to hear your background and where your, what your story has been.
Thank you. It's been really incredible to get the opportunity to work at Metabolic Mind and work directly so closely with Dr. Brett Schur. He's inspired so many patients to try out this form of treatment. And I'm sure from your perspective too, it must have been incredible just to watch this movement grow, and so validating to see the kind of substantial role that metabolic health plays in mental health. For me, discovering metabolic therapies has been absolutely transformative. It's given me kind of a life I didn't even dream was possible after I had my original diagnosis of bipolar I disorder. I have now actually been stable doing solely metabolic therapies for more than 3 years now. And like other people that I've had the privilege of connecting with in my role as mental health communications and advocacy manager at Metabolic Mind, I had been told that I had bipolar I disorder as a chronic, lifelong condition. And other than taking antipsychotic medications that really had absolutely devastating side effects for me, that there were no other options. Like, if I wanted to be stable and sane, my only choice was to take these medications that, not only did they have terrible cardiometabolic side effects, taking those medications within 6 months, I put on more than 70 pounds, but they also really kind of blunted my emotions and my creativity. On those medications, even though, I was able to work and be independent and everything like that, but I really never felt like I had my full cognitive abilities. Like, I always felt it was very difficult to focus and think creatively the way that I was able to do prior to my diagnosis. Um, would you want me to kind of talk about the journey and how
Yeah, I'd love it. I'd love it to go back. And when was the first time that you knew, okay, I'm different than other people? I have other reactions. Was there a trauma before this, or how did this first come on when you first were diagnosed?
Yeah, I really didn't experience any major trauma. I mean, I think as humans, we all have a little bit of trauma, right? But I had a pretty happy childhood. And for me, the onset of bipolar I disorder felt pretty sudden. At the time, I was 28 years old, and it was a strange experience for me because at the time it really seemed like my future was bright and I was on top of the world. I had started a nonprofit organization in India that does women's empowerment through employing them in garment manufacturing. I was 24 when I started that organization, and we had gotten a lot of support from Rotary International, some big grants to set up a sewing unit with industrial grade machines. And I was really passionate about the work that we were doing to help eliminate poverty, help women educate their children. And I actually got this great scholarship through Rotary International to get my master's degree and work on this nonprofit I'd started, Jhoole, in India. So I was traveling back and forth from London, where I was getting my master's degree in fashion entrepreneurship, to India, all covered by this amazing scholarship. It felt like, wow, I have all these opportunities. And all I felt was, passion and enthusiasm for what I was doing. And it came on ridiculously suddenly. In retrospect, I can see that I had signs of hypomania. At the time, it just seemed like I had a lot of energy and was very focused on what I was doing. I was a devoted student. I thought I lived a relatively healthy lifestyle. I ate more of a vegan diet, higher in carbs, lower fat. I was exercising a lot, and I just wanted to, I felt a lot of responsibility, and I guess there was some stress because I wanted this organization to be successful. And starting at a young age, I had a lot to learn. So there were factors like stress, but I didn't really see anything I knew to recognize as a symptom of mental illness. At the time, it seemed like all of these things were positive attributes, right, that were helping me to excel and build this new organization. What I didn't realize is that it could tip over into full-blown mania. So it was just actually one night I was working on a paper, and like so many students, I'd done this countless times during my undergraduate degree, where I was excited writing a paper, all my ideas would synthesize, come together, like at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and then you crash and go to sleep, have your paper done right in time for the deadline. And that seemed pretty normal. But then when I hit that, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., I just never crashed and went to sleep. And I just stayed up for what ended up being literally nights on end, alone in my apartment. And it got to the point where all of a sudden my thoughts became increasingly delusional, and I started to hallucinate and became fully psychotic. And I wandered, out of my apartment in London, not really knowing where I was going, and stumbled into a church where I demanded to meet God, which at the time I was very confident that they could obviously introduce me to God. That was going to be really straightforward. But they didn't introduce me to God. Instead, they called the police, who came and
Wow.
the church kicking and screaming. And I had all these conspiracy theories in my head. So I really thought they were trying to kill me. And they took me by force to an inpatient psychiatric facility where then, it really was a horrific experience because I had these conspiracy theories in my head, that they were kidnapping me and I was going to be murdered. And then they hold you down and inject you with antipsychotic medications. You basically feel like I felt in that moment like I was being murdered, like I had to go through that. And I was hospitalized for more than a month and a half. And during that time, I was pretty much delusional the entire time. I didn't understand that I was a patient being treated. I was living in kind of an alternate reality, I would say.
Yeah, when you were doing that, to you, did you seem reasonable? In your brain, you thought, like, this is clearly what's happening. It made sense to you, right?
Absolutely. That's what's so scary when you look back on it, is that the experience that you have is so real. And in many ways, my memories from those times are astonishingly clear, the delusions that I was thinking, and my senses were really heightened. So in some ways, it almost felt like hyper real, like realer than everyday life in a strange way.
And probably didn't help you, probably when you were inpatient, that they were probably giving you terrible food at the same time when you're having these delusional issues, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting. I sometimes wonder if my instincts, like, if it would have run its course naturally, if things might have gone differently. Because every time I've been manic, I've had a desire to fast and I stop eating and they like actually force me to start eating. And of course, what we know with the fasting being a form of metabolic therapy and helping with mitochondrial function and the things that I believe are the underlying cause of that illness, I wonder, what would have happened if
Very interesting. That's a very interesting thought, and I've heard those kind of discussions before because, with anorexia, for instance, when women are fasting or men are fasting, they get to ketosis and they feel peace, and when they eat again, they feel terrible and stressed and anxious again, and so that state of ketosis it definitely has to be a factor in some of this. And when you get mental clarity when you're fasting, and then you eat sugar and stuff, then you get out of that mental clarity again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you probably heard about the study in Maryland with the ketogenic diet for schizophrenia that has been halted, and we're hoping will still end up taking place. But it was so interesting to me when I read, like, how can these patients really opt into following a ketogenic diet? And I was thinking, that should be the default. Like, I should have to sign a waiver to eat the terrible carbs and foods that they feed you in those facilities. Like, that should be something I'd have to sign permission for, to eat, the sugary pancakes and all those things now that I know are absolutely terrible for my mental health and the opposite of what I needed in those moments, right?
Yeah, it is pretty amazing what they're doing to people without realizing it, and they're thinking, well, we'll give them sugary treats because that will make them feel better, get a little dopamine response. But like when I first heard of Chris Palmer treating schizophrenia, I was like, let's talk to this guy before I say too much about it, because I really wanted to get a feel of what he was talking about. Because I was like, how can you be like, I get it with anxiety, depression, maybe insomnia, those kind of things, that people would get better by changing diet. But schizophrenia is a different class. Like if you want to scare a doctor, say we're sending you a schizophrenic patient. As a matter of fact, I've had two come in the last month, and they're doing remarkably well on a low carb ketogenic diet, but when you heard his reasoning, he said, well, what do you do with the seizure disorder ketogenic diet, that all the drugs we're using for schizophrenia are seizure meds, so maybe if we calm the brain down, that can help. And his story and some of his anecdotes with patients are pretty amazing. So going through all this, how did you like, oh, so I'm just curious, I'm sure people are curious too. It's like, so what happened to this helping women in India thing when you went manic, and when you're out of your mind for a while, did that thing all fall apart?
Well, so I'd started at 24 and then that episode happened at 28. So I had luckily already kind of established a base for Jhoole, the name of the organization. And I had spent a lot of time there in India with that community. I speak Hindi. I had spent a year abroad there as
Wow.
scholar before and really love the culture. So the organization was really built in a way to be self-sustaining, and we focused a lot on empowering people locally through training and local partnerships. So a lot of the orders that they had were from the local community, and they had a local boutique. So they've been able to continue to grow and thrive. Luckily, it still exists today, and I still volunteer. And
Wow.
I feel so fortunate because it would have been really, I mean, as devastating as this was to go through, it would have been really heartbreaking for me to see that organization not be able to survive.
Yeah, it's amazing, and it's just bringing back to mind Jhoole's like I had his conversation is coming out today, as a matter of fact, for people. You can go back and listen to his episode, but yeah, this guy is brilliant, and he learned. A lot of people. It seems like they're very creative. They're very when your brain's going all the time. So is that a possibility that when you have so many entrepreneurial thoughts or helping people or being motivated? Do you think that has something to do with this? That with bipolar one, do you see that in your friends or patients that you talk to that have bipolar one? Do you see that's a trend where they're very either type A, motivated, always thinking, creative, and this is part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've met countless people like that. And it's interesting. I even have a good friend who says a lot of the delusions he had when he was in psychotic mania, like ended up manifesting in certain real ways within his life. And he's now a very successful entrepreneur. So I do think that's fascinating. And prior to being in this field, I was really kind of ashamed of my illness. So I wasn't very open about it. And I didn't connect with many people who could relate to my experiences. And that's been one of the most beautiful things about becoming a part of this movement is really realizing just how many people there are out there who are incredible, intelligent, creative people who have been through experiences like this and come out on the other side able to fulfill their potential. And for me, discovering metabolic therapies is what's allowed me to kind of feel like I've not only gotten back to baseline, but I've actually grown a lot through the experiences I've been through, kind of had that post-traumatic growth where I'm even better off now at this point than I would have been if I'd never gone through those things. And, kind of what you were saying before made me think when you were talking about how difficult it can be, like for a doctor to see a patient who has schizophrenia. And I think we see these symptoms that people experience with a psychiatric condition as frightening and somehow a part of their personality. And when people experience mental illness, a lot of them confuse their symptoms with their identity. They feel like somehow there's something deeply wrong with them and they're flawed and they're broken and this is a part of who they are. But when I've been able to correct those symptoms through metabolic therapies, it's really liberated me from that perception. And I've realized that was an illness that's just as separate for me as like cancer would have been, just a physiological problem with these symptoms that manifested mentally, but they were still just symptoms of a psychiatric physiological condition, not a part of who I inherently was, right?
Yeah, and that's so important, and it's such a hard disease. It runs in my family also, and I've seen it's hard because Hannah has a new project going on and she gets excited. She's telling me how excited she is about this new project. I'm like, uh-oh. Do you think Hannah's a little too excited? What do you think? Is this normal? Do you think this is like, all right? Is this coming back? And you don't want to, it's a very awkward thing because you don't want to say anything because you don't want to offend, but you go, oh gosh, I don't want you to go spend all your money and buy, a monastery in Tibet or something. It's like, it happens like those kind of things. Like, oh, I'm just going to buy a ski lodge. Like, what? You don't have any money. Eh? Was it a hard thing for you, like where your family members or friends would look at you and go, "Are you okay, Hannah?"
Well, it's one of the most odd things about bipolar disorder and this illness. Few people can understand what it's like to feel afraid when you feel too good. It seems like you should never have to worry about, wow, I feel great. Is this a problem? Um, but I would say yes, with metabolic therapies, what was interesting over the last 3 years, like using ketogenic therapy and other metabolic interventions, things like exercise, fasting, meditation, being able to be stable with that, I would have these kind of like moments of peak experience where I'd have a feeling of euphoria and awe and flow and creative energy that in the past I associated with hypomania and mania and saw as dangerous. But what I found doing these types of therapies is that I can have that state, but then I'll be tired and I'll want a power nap or I'll sleep great that night and then I'll wake up refreshed. So it's kind of like with antipsychotics, I felt like I was throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that like I had to suppress the good if I didn't want the bad, right? Like it, but now it's the best of both worlds because I feel like I get all the beautiful aspects that I associated with my illness without the downside.
Yeah, and like you said, you feel numb to the world. I heard that from people on antidepressants a lot. Like, I just feel numb all the time. Like nothing excites me, nothing gets me too. Like I'm just kind of going through life, and that's a really a hard way to exist, also.
I went through like about 7 years of stability like that, where I was working in healthcare, marketing, and sales, and like able to support myself, but I had no passion for life or joy. It just felt like I'd get home from work and just want to go to sleep, like and get into bed at like 7, and I just wasn't enthusiastic. I didn't want a challenging career. When I'm now, I have so many passions and interests and side projects, and like life is always entertaining, but then I just felt so numb and sedated.
Yeah, so what happened? What was the clicker where you said, "Let me look at this metabolic part of it," and what kind of changes did you make, and what convinced you that, hey, maybe I should look at this?
So what happened, I was working for a nonprofit organization called Woman Space, which was a great organization. They had a lot of creative arts programming, but also holistic health stuff. I started, for about 7 years when I was stable, the other thing I was doing, I was self-medicating a lot, like drinking a lot, smoking. I felt like, I had tried so hard to be healthy before, but then I had this mysterious illness I couldn't control, started taking medications, put on all this weight. And I'm like, what is even the point? So then I just started taking on a lot of negative coping habits. Um, and I lived like that for so long, and I was technically obese and all of that. And when I started working for that organization, I slowly developed, like, first I cut out the negative coping habits, but then I started to get really positive habits, things like meditation and exercise and intermittent and extended fasting, things that I now recognize as metabolic therapies. Of course, I didn't know they were metabolic therapies at the time, but I could instinctively feel that they were very healing for me, especially fasting. I got really addicted to the way I'd feel in an extended fast, 3, 5 days, even sometimes 2 weeks. So I would really crave that. My friends would kind of like, are you sure you should be doing all this fasting? Why are you so addicted to this? And I had no idea it could actually be helping with my underlying, root cause of my bipolar disorder at the time. But I always felt such clarity of thought, energy, and focus when I was fasting. So I started to feel better, right? Doing all of these things. And I thought I've been stable on medication for like more than 7 years now. And I'm like, maybe I don't even have bipolar disorder anymore. It's been so long. So I decided to go off of the medication. And I did it in a way that was unsafe. And I would, of course, caution anybody with a psychiatric condition that they need to taper off very slowly with medical supervision. And at the time, I didn't know anything about ketogenic therapy. So I really didn't have the right processes in place anyway to be stable without medication. So I went off my medication. And as had happened to me 2 other times in the past, I was fine for about 8 months. And that's when the hypomania set in. And then within a year, I would have full blown, psychotic episode and need to be hospitalized. So that is what happened to me at that point. But one thing that's really interesting is I've often heard psychologists say that usually if you have manic episodes and you go on and off medication, each consecutive episode tends to get worse. And my third episode was actually by far the least severe of any that I've had. I was only hospitalized for a couple weeks and the psychosis lifted more quickly. Now, in retrospect, I think maybe it's a sign that some of the healing modalities, the fasting and stuff I had been doing was actually helping with the condition. But it wasn't good enough that I could stay stable. So I was hospitalized. I got out. And it was at that point where I was like, okay, I know I'm being told again, like, if I want to stay stable, I have one choice. I have a chronic lifelong illness. I have to take those medications again. And I had just started to feel myself again, to get my creativity back, to get to a normal weight, to feel active and energetic and have some joy and passion. And I'm like, I just cannot do that to myself again. If I start taking these medications, I know exactly what's going to happen. And, it sounds awful to say. And I think people even tend to think patients like this are so irresponsible and they want to blame them for, not wanting to adhere and stay on medications. But I was thinking about all the artists and writers throughout history who have had bipolar disorder. And I'm like, yeah, Van Gogh's tragic, but like he lived a, a full life and created beautiful works of art that enrich our world. And would it have been better if he was just like medicated and numb? And I thought, I just can't do it again. But luckily, I also had this thought, like maybe there's an alternative out there that I just don't even know about. So I started scouring the internet. This was in the summer of 2021. And I came upon Dr. Palmer's website, Dr. Christopher Palmer's website. And at the time, Brain Energy wasn't published yet, but there was information about ketogenic therapy. And of course, it immediately clicked with me because I knew that when I was fasting, I was in ketosis and that I experienced this surge of energy and clarity of thought and focus. So it resonated with me. And then I also came to understand about processes like mitophagy and mitochondrial biogenesis, the idea that through a fasting mimicking diet, you're on a continuous basis improving the quality and quantity of your mitochondria. So I was pretty sold on like this might actually help me. So at the time, I thought it would help manage symptoms. I was optimistic, but I don't think I necessarily thought it could really be enough to completely keep me from ever being hospitalized again and to completely replace my medication. But I thought it was worth a shot to manage symptoms, and it immediately helped alleviate my depression. Usually following mania, I'd experience severe, incessant suicidal thoughts after getting out of the hospital. And this drastically decreased the depression. So I wasn't really suicidal, and it lifted entirely within a couple months instead of lasting an entire year. And I think that was largely probably from switching the fuel source of my brain from glucose to ketones, and then, the ongoing process of cellular repair. But it wasn't until about a year into that therapy that I was able to connect with a group of volunteers working directly with Dr. Palmer, where I heard for the first time the word remission and came to understand that like what I had been doing was healing on a level I couldn't have understood before, that this was actually helping me to put my illness into complete remission, not only manage symptoms, but address that underlying root cause and allow me to be healthy and happy again in a way that I really didn't realize was possible.
Yeah, your whole story is amazing, and the journey you went on, and your past experience. Saying, "Wait, I felt better when I observing and making observations." And one question I have that it's always been an issue with the antipsychotic medications is massive weight gain. Do you think your nutrition habits, your eating increased as a result of that, or do you think it was a physiologic change from the meds itself? Because I know there's debate about this.
I think it's a really tragic feedback loop where it was partially self-soothing with really bad foods, because I was so depressed, and that was something comforting for me. But then on top of that, you have medications that are doing more metabolic damage. So like while you're eating way too many calories, you also have your metabolism impaired. So it just exacerbates it. And then kind of the more weight you're packing on, the worse you feel about it, the guilt and the shame, and this just drives more
And the more metabolic sick you get, the more your body's trying to get good nutrition, and it says eat more, but you're eating the wrong thing. Yeah.
It's like starving for glucose that it can't use properly. And yeah, it's just a nightmare.
And how about, you said before you were more vegetarian or vegan? Was that a hard switch for you to say, I'm gonna eat more animal products now? Was that a hard like ethical thing for you, or were you doing that for health reasons, or was it more religious reasons, or what was your reasoning earlier when you were eating differently?
Yeah, so actually, I've been a vegetarian since I was 3 years old. It was like as soon as I was old enough to realize meat was an animal, and it wasn't a moral judgment on anyone else. It was just I lost my appetite the minute
Yeah, no, I get it.
did it with an animal. I'm just like, I cannot do that. And so my parents humored me. They thought it would be a phase, but I never grew out of it. And so I'm actually still a vegetarian.
Awesome.
I started originally with vegan keto, but eventually decided I would incorporate like family farm eggs, which doesn't gross me out at all. I have no ethical qualms with that, and it's made my diet satiating and helps with, getting my protein and everything. So yeah, I've been doing vegetarian keto. I also do
That's awesome to hear. That's amazing, because that's so important. That's so important for people to hear. Is like, you can do it. You can do it if you add in eggs. And my concern has been people who don't have eggs. They don't have a good protein source, and trying to get your mental functioning better. And there's a lot of benefits from eggs from a mental nutrition standpoint. So I think that's really an important point to make. I'm glad you're making that point.
Yeah, and I also have a friend named Diane Harwood who's been doing vegan keto for a number of years now, and she's really happy with her diet. You know, there's so many different ways to approach it. As long as you're in ketosis, you can be successful with this form of therapy. And, you know, obviously, I'm not at all vegetarian for health reasons. In fact, for health reasons, I think it would probably be optimal if I did incorporate meat into my diet. But at the same time, I think metabolic therapies are really an interesting balance because even things like our spirituality play into our metabolic health. And so while it's not a moral judgment on others, I know that it would afflict me somewhere mentally to think that I was eating an animal just personally. So I feel like maybe the benefit I'd get in nutrients would be countered by like not feeling right about that in myself. So it's, you know, we got to acknowledge personal preference and
I think that's a huge point. That's a huge, huge point. Anyone listening, look, if you're carnivore and you get upset with the vegans, like if it's working, it's working. If you're doing well mentally, right, great. Don't get upset. Like if you're vegan, don't get upset with it. It's a hard thing because it's if we get so caught up, and I see it all the time where you're all your stress hormones and cortisol and insulin, you might as well be eating cookies every day if you're going to be frustrated and upset with people all the time, right?
yeah, exactly. And it's funny and ironic. I guess I never thought growing up as this vegetarian since childhood that I'd have so many carnivore friends, but life is full of surprises. I do have a good friend, Jessica Apple, who you may be familiar with because she's
Yeah, I want to get her on. Yeah, I want to get her on too. She's been doing
like,
great work.
yeah, she's wonderful, but she's a good friend of mine who kind of describes herself as a recovered vegetarian because for her, she does think that she really benefited from incorporating meat. So she always kind of lovingly pushes me, like, are you sure you don't want to just eat a little tallow? Like, just add some meat. And she told me her mantra is kind of like, I am at the top of the food chain and I have biological needs. It cracks me up, but doesn't work for me. And at the end of the day, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Like I feel like I've done beautifully with vegetarian keto. I'm not having any issues that I feel like it would be necessary to experiment with adding animal products.
Yeah, I think that's so important too. And then saying, okay, if I'm vegetarian, but I'm eating Oreo cookies every day and drinking Coke and stuff, that's going to be a a problem with the mental functioning, right? But if you're on a you're keeping your calories pretty regular and you're not eating tons of processed sugar and you're eating a real vegetarian or vegan diet, it can be done. And it's good to hear because so many people say, look, I just don't like what you're saying. I just don't like eating meat. Why do I have to eat meat if I don't want to? It's like, okay, are there substitutes that we can do? Are there good vegetarian substitutes you think for protein that you go, okay, this works pretty good for me, and for people listening who are choosing more of a vegan or vegetarian pathway, I think it's important rather than saying it doesn't work. Go, okay, how are you doing it if it's working for you?
Right. I eat like minimally processed tofu. I stay away from fake meats that are just highly processed. I try to stay away from ultra processed food in general. I do eat some pea, minimally processed pea protein powder is very helpful for me. I've tried to be more intentional about making sure I get enough protein because I'm another great way to improve mitochondria is through strength training and trying to build more muscle. So I've made a concerted effort to try to make sure I'm getting enough protein, and that's been helpful. But one bit of advice I'd give to any vegetarian who's trying this form of treatment, when I initially started and I tried to like count my grams of carbs and keep it under a certain amount, it did feel incredibly restrictive. And I thought, how am I going to possibly eat like enough vegetables that will make me satiated? So I decided to try a different approach and I just ordered, you know, a Keto Mojo blood meter right away and tried to eat more intuitively and measure my ketone levels. And I actually was able to consume a lot more vegetables than I thought would be possible if I was going on counting carbs alone. It's interesting, but everybody's kind of metabolically different. So it's really important that you get to know your own body and how you can reach certain ketone levels because there's no need to restrict more than necessary to.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point too. Like, right, if your gut microbiome is going to digest it, if you have enough fiber and you're not absorbing all that sugar or glucose, fructose, whatever you want to call it, yeah, that makes a difference too, right? If you're eating a healthier, you're getting all that fiber with the so So the point I'm getting at is when they talk about net carbs and all that, if you're eating a ton of vegetables, you're not absorbing a lot of the carbohydrates probably, and it's not going to take you out of. You're showing that with your Keto Mojo, who happens to sponsor this podcast, right? So,
Yeah, that's
um,
one of I couldn't have done it, without the Keto Mojo. That's been so helpful for me. So that's kind of the first recommendation I give to anybody who does this, because it's absolutely critical. If you're going to do this as a therapy, you need to be positive you're in ketosis. And one thing I also noticed pretty early on is how like keto friendly, keto marketed treats would often kick me out of ketosis. So we need to really be careful and watch things.
huge point. Yeah, huge point. Are there some vegetarian or vegan things that throw you out of ketosis every time that you go, oh yeah, like is it like quinoa or rice or
Yeah,
whatever?
I mean, I stay away from
You stay
all
from
the
all that.
obvious things. Yeah, like potatoes and sweet potatoes and rice and lentils and beans and chickpeas. Like I do stay away from all of that. I have to be careful with nuts because I love nuts, and that's one thing I could overconsume that might kick me out of ketosis. And I do eat, some berries.
Yeah, I just this week I had a lady. She goes, "That what's wrong with her sensor, her continuous glucose monitor?" But she was eating cashews. Whenever she had cashews, her sugars shot way up. I was like, "Well, let's try macadamia nuts." Boom, steady. I'm seeing her today, as a matter of fact. And just making those and figuring out with your body. That's why monitoring is so important, because there's certain things you're going to be able to eat. If you're eating tofu and it's fine, and you're getting your good protein and your sugars aren't going crazy, who cares? Do that as long as you have a protein source.
And I think another reason it's so important to honor that individual choice. I mean, look at a country like India that has like it's the vegetarian capital of the world, and they have so many people who are vegetarian for spiritual reasons who aren't going to compromise on that. So it's important to show that there's a variety of approaches you can take with this, honoring your unique perspective and lifestyle choices that will still be effective from a therapeutic perspective.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Obviously we have religious reasons, we have ethical reasons, or just you just don't like certain foods. Like, I don't want to eat fish every day. I'll eat it because it's good for me, but I don't go, oh my gosh, let's do that. So I think it's just kind of figuring out what works for you. And I think that's I'm so glad you're making that point, because I know in the low carb keto metabolic health space, they're like, you have to eat meat every day and you have to eat bacon and all this stuff. And so people just don't stomach that, or they don't want that. So you go, okay, can I be because the assumption is if you say I'm in ketosis, they go, oh, you're eating ribeye steaks every night, right?
Yeah, exactly. We try to be really communicate this at Metabolic Mind as well, because just so many people make the assumption that keto is like a diet, but it's not, right? It's a method of getting into ketosis. It's about that physiological state of ketosis, which you can reach with all different dietary approaches, whether you're vegetarian keto, vegan keto, Mediterranean keto, right? There's a lot of different nutritional approaches to getting your body into ketosis. So.
And I think the other point that you make that's so important, and part of the reason I started this podcast, because low carb MD, all we talked about was low carb initially, but so many people would say, well, I got my stress under control. I found God, or I did this, right? What did they do to get through that gave them hope that they could change their life from being a 400-pound diabetic to, running marathons now? Like, how does that happen? And so, you're drawing in these other things like meditation, fasting, positive attitude, all these other factors that play a huge role in our metabolic health, right? Because if our body's always in a stress mode, if we can break, and that's one thing I've been really focusing on the last couple of years, is if we can work on that stress component, right, people do so much better.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of adherence too to a ketogenic diet, I feel like that positive framing is so critical to even help people be motivated to stick with it, because you have to be able to visualize that better future that you can ultimately achieve through adhering to that, lifestyle.
Yeah, and just being at peace with yourself, being at peace with people around you and all that, and enjoying life. And so a part of your journey too was this Radiant Beast website you started. How did you you were just trying to put all the information together like in one place so people can look
Yeah,
and
so I
find?
started that because I had opportunities. As I mentioned, I got involved with doing some volunteer work for Dr. Christopher Palmer, and I wrote a few articles for his Brain Energy magazine. That was the first opportunity I had to write about this metabolic psychiatry movement. And then I had an opportunity to do freelance writing for Bazooki Group and Metabolic Mind. So I just wanted to have a website where I could link to those resources. And since I started at Metabolic Mind, all of my writing is there on the Metabolic Mind blog. So I haven't updated my website much, but I am keeping it because I do plan to write a book. And so that's one vehicle where I'll be sharing some of my other writing as well.
Yeah, it's exciting that you have your creativity back, you got your life back. So I have to ask you, so what's life's best medicine for you? Like what keeps you going when things were really down? And I have to ask you too, before that is, did you cycle down to where you got depressed and were in bed and didn't want to deal with people for, withdraw from society and all that stuff, or were you mostly having the mania part of it?
I mean, the depression following mania was debilitating. I absolutely, when I came out of the mania, the only way to describe it really is that I felt like I had brain damage. I looked at pictures of myself from just months before my episode, and I felt like I was on top of the world, getting my master's, starting this nonprofit. I felt like I wasn't even the same person anymore. And I looked back at myself thinking she had no idea how lucky she was. And like, now look at me, I'm broken. I have no future. I have no hope.
Hmm.
Incredibly suicidal, and all I wanted to do was sleep all day because, especially when we talk about the brain energy theory and this idea that when you're in depression, you literally don't have energy to fuel your brain and body. So everything was a tremendous chore, trying to get out of bed and brush my teeth and get changed. It just felt like I had people didn't even, my family didn't even recognize me anymore. Who is this person? It wasn't the person that they knew.
Yeah, just trying to, my mom struggles with bipolar. She said she would have days where she would sit there for an hour trying to figure out what to wear, what, just to do some simple task where your brain just can't function. You just can't get going. You don't have any energy to exercise because, well, just exercise. Dude. I was like, when you feel like have the flu and go and exercise, that's kind of how you feel, you have no motivation and there's no hope. And I think that's a horrible place to be.
It was absolutely awful, and it felt, you know, like I had brain damage, and because I was told I had a chronic lifelong condition, I felt like I'm never gonna be myself again, so what's even the point in staying alive, which is why I'm so devoted to this work now and spreading a message of hope and remission, because nobody should go through a devastating experience like that to be told that they're never gonna get back to baseline, they're never gonna be who they were prior to becoming ill. Everybody needs to know that healing and recovery is possible, and you can get through this. And not only that, I guess when you talk about life's best medicine, at this point, I almost feel like these traumatic and devastating things that I have been through have made me so much stronger. And it's been this form of post traumatic growth that it's almost been a blessing in disguise. I feel like this has made me discover that most invaluable lesson in life, which is that our perspective, our control over our thoughts and behaviors is the most invaluable asset that we have, and if we can take care of that, like you talk about positive framing, and every day I wake up and I'm grateful that I am in control of my thoughts and choices in this day, and I want to make the most of that. It's almost like going through a near death experience, and getting another chance at life. Like I had almost died while alive. And now that I have that control back and I'm in the driver's seat, I never want to take that lightly. I want to make the most of each and every day. And the most incredible opportunity is that I have this message of hope that so many people with this mental health crisis and our health crisis are in need of that message. And I know that even though driving systemic change, changing the healthcare system is a marathon, not a sprint. This is going to take time and a lot of collective efforts to make that change. When we do this, the podcast you're doing, any opportunity that we have to reach one person who needs this message and will resonate with it and make those changes to transform their lives. I'm sure you hear that. We hear that at Metabolic Mind all the time, that people stumbled upon this miracle that they needed and have since completely transformed their lives. Like, what could be a bigger gift than to have something that priceless that you can share with people? Right?
Yeah, and I think you raised so many important, and we can't be at war with each other. Goes, if it's working for you and you're getting better, keep doing what you're doing. Let's keep doing this, right? If you're, yeah, however you're doing it, because I know, again, I see for the thing that struck me the most, I would see these carnivores talk about this switch going off. All of a sudden, their depression, anxiety. And I don't know if it was nutritional deficiency they had, or I don't know what it was or why it happens, but I see it all the time. And to hear just adding in maybe certain things into your diet, maybe getting some supplements or micronutrients that you need, whatever it is. If you're struggling with depression, anxiety, don't keep doing what you're doing. You got to make a change somewhere. At some point, you got to go, okay, I can't just live like this. I got to make a change. And, the other point I want to make, Tro just posted this morning as things go. And, it said that they just pulled a medical group of doctors, and 32% of them said if someone has depression, bipolar by itself with no other medical problems, it's ethical to put them down, to euthanize them, because there's no hope. And you go, oh my gosh, just think of your doctor back then when you were addressed, goes, you know what, life's not worth living. Nice to lie, and they're making that judgment for their patient. It's incredible that we don't say, well, what can we do to give you hope and get you back on track, rather than just giving up on you. Go, you'll never get better. This is how you're going to be.
It's absolutely unbelievable, especially when you look at the rate of technology and innovation and how much is going to be possible moving into the future. The fact that people don't have optimism and don't think, what kind of scientific breakthroughs can we have, to help end suffering. Like, I think that really shows an ingrained problem in the way mental health conditions are treated and understood, that we should be throwing everything we have into science and innovations to help people. The fact that we're accepting up to a third of patients with serious mental illness as being treatment resistant and just kind of writing them off and saying it's hopeless is I just think it's unjustifiable, right, to leave people behind like that.
Yeah, and that's why I'm so excited with the Bazooki Foundation's doing, what the Metabolic Mind, all these things that we're seeing coming together. Because I think the problem is in medicine that we've become so specialized in our little areas of concern that we forget, hey, how's this going to affect the rest of the body, right? So, for me, I look at, if I have a poorly controlled diabetic, I go, look, here's what's coming. Depression is going to be on the road if you don't get the sugars under control. And it's true. Poorly, and the data is very clear on this. The more poorly controlled your diabetes is, more likely you are to have mental illness, depression, anxiety, bipolar, you name it. If we can get those sugars, and it comes back to this whole metabolic thing. We're talking about, we have data on Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, major depression, anxiety, hypertension, you name it. If we get metabolically healthy, these things don't get worse.
Yeah, it's incredible because once you see it and can relate to it and read the science of it, it seems glaringly simple and obvious that it's boiling down to our cellular mitochondrial health and all of these non-communicable diseases. It's just this, what's going wrong with our cellular biology manifesting in different ways, whether it's cancer or diabetes or psychiatric conditions. And once you understand how to repair that, like Casey Means' book, Good Energy, is so amazing. And I hope it changes the world, because once you see it, if someone like me who has no background in medical school, anything like that can grasp this science, you think, how can this not be something that's adopted so that we can address this healthcare crisis that we're having in this country?
Yeah, that book is so great on so many levels. And part of it, when you step back and see the conflict of interest everywhere, it's like, oh my gosh, because there are people who benefit from someone being on lifelong medication. There are a lot of people who benefit from that. So if you say we have a better way where you can come off your meds and do it under the watchful eye, like you said, not just stop your meds and think I'm just gonna eat, steak and everything's gonna be great. Because there's a lot to this picture. We're all individuals and we all have different life experience, and childhood traumas play a role. And there's so much, in here, being stressed and tense and worried all the time. You can't rest your brain. You can't sleep at night. And so, when people find their peace, I think that's such a huge thing. And finding your, like, why are you here? Like, doing what you're doing. You may be working more hours now than you used to. And you go, but I have a passion in that because I'm helping people, because there's someone out there who is in the boat that you were in a few years ago, and you get, gosh, if I can help that person, if I could just get them on the right track, and you see how much of an impact you can make on others, the lives of other people.
Absolutely. And sometimes you do have patients who have an adverse kind of reaction to the idea of metabolic therapies, because there's a lot of sense sometimes that trauma causes these psychiatric conditions. But what you see is that experiences of trauma do affect metabolic health, so it kind of ties together. But there are some advocates, who have been through complex trauma. And what I've heard, my friend Mia Mendez, who's one of the winners of our recent Metabolic Mind Fresh Start Award, is just a really powerful voice of advocacy. She talks about how once she did ketogenic therapy, it was that stabilizing force that allowed her to do the talk therapy effectively, to work through the trauma and the baggage. So nobody's saying that this is a silver bullet or panacea and that you eat keto and it resolves complex childhood trauma, but it can help you create that stable base and help fix your physiology so that you can work through those complex emotions and experiences.
Very huge point. And that's an excellent point because I have couples who come in, the wife's stressed and worried, intense, and she's you're having panic attacks, and the husband's like, calm down. I said, okay, look, let me tell you this. You're in the ocean drowning, and I'm standing up on the ship staring down at you, and you're like drowning. And I said, calm down. It's okay. Just calm down. You can't think. You can't. You're drowning. But if someone throws you a life jacket or one of those lifesaver rings, you hold on to that. Now you can start thinking about, okay, how do I get out of the water in that panic? And that's what I mean. If we can get the metabolic part, the life stress part, whatever, your perspective on life a little bit better, maybe you can deal better because you're holding onto a flotation device when you're drowning. Because when you're drowning, no matter how many times people tell you to calm down, you're going to be panicked because it's life and death mode, right? So many of us are locked into that.
Exactly. That's a great metaphor and a great way of looking at it. I often think about it like a computer. You have hardware and software. If you have a hardware problem, even if you have the best software, you can't run it. And, but once you fix the hardware, you might need some software upgrades, So I luckily didn't have to go through extreme childhood trauma, but what I went through in the hospital was so traumatic. So I can understand that, that once you stabilize, there's still a lot of things to work through after you've been through, what it means to go through a severe psychiatric condition, right?
Yeah, and Dr. Palmer even said that. He goes, look, that's when the work starts because you have someone who's way out there. Once they start functioning in society again, now you have a whole set of new issues to deal with, right? If you're schizophrenic for the last 10 years, now all of a sudden you start getting your mental clarity. And I was like, oh, I gotta, like, what do I do? Do I have to work? Or how do I function in society? Now there's all kinds of new things that you have to deal with, right? So it's not like you just eat different and everything gets better. It's a lot of work still to get back on track. So did you answer what life's best medicine is for you? Is it helping other people? Is that where we're at?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to, as cheesy as the message is, the Beatles song, All You Need Is Love. Like, I was just thinking about how profound those lyrics really are. There's nothing you can do that can't be done, nothing you can sing that can't be sung.
Mm-hmm.
The end of the day, it's all about love. I feel like I've been so blessed through this form of treatment to be able to connect with a community that's about that, about supporting and uplifting one another and creating hope and assisting people and being able to transform their lives. I feel like nothing is more valuable than being able to be a part of a mission like this and just feel the love with great people like you, having the opportunity to have conversations that reach people and make a difference.
That's awesome stuff. And I'm so excited about all you're doing. And, like I said, Tro and I, when we talked about this 6 or 7 years ago, it was the Western medicine guys went nuts for 3 days attacking us. And you say, well, look, we're seeing it. If I see someone smiling again that was depressed and anxious and stressed, and hey, I'm sleeping better. Oh my gosh, I'm getting along better with my family. All these things were happening and we were seeing it, but we didn't have randomized controlled trials. We're just both seeing the same thing. We're treating diabetes and all these other things got better. And then you feel like, oh my gosh, are we snake oil salesmen? Because if we say it helps mood, are we stepping outside our boundaries? Even the movie Fat Fiction, yeah, I know they have the tape of this, and hopefully they showed on another movie, but because it was too controversial at the time. But all my patients were saying their mood got better and they walked out of a fog and they heard the bird singing for the first time. And you go, wow, that is powerful stuff. That's really amazing. But the movie was about remission of diabetes. It wasn't about mood, right? So, I get it. You want to stay in your lane a bit and not get to like we're curing everything in the world. But the more I'm around, the more I say, wow, it is helping. I don't see anything that it's making worse by getting metabolically healthier.
Yeah. I have a question for you as well. Like, are you optimistic about the larger systemic change that needs to take place in the healthcare system? I think we can both agree that no matter what, it's worth it to have the ripple effect, and any person we can reach is amazing. But what do you think about actually addressing kind of the vested interest and all the major problems that we have that are making
Yeah.
disease the norm?
I think the scab got ripped off, and I think the Great Oz was exposed. I think the last 4 years with the COVID lockdowns and how the mental health effects, and So I think a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, I don't know if I trust these organizations anymore. Because when that's why I like what Callie Means and Casey Means are doing. They're pulling back the conflict of interest that we're all under, right? So a lot of the governing bodies were taking money. It's undeniable now. So a lot of people, I think it's more of a grassroots up. Enough people are going to say, I'm feeling better. Like my patients who go out and evangelize, they say, I'm feeling better, my mood's better, my back doesn't hurt anymore, my knees are better, all this stuff. And their neighbors go, what are you doing? Right? Oh, that crazy low carb diet or that keto diet or that vegetarian diet, whatever it is. Cutting out processed foods is never the wrong answer. So I think we're at a point now, especially with some of the new developments, the more people I'm talking to in medicine are saying, you know what? Like if my obligation is for the patient in front of me, right? So I think more and more doctors are realizing that over the last 4 years, we've violated most of the medical ethics that were foundational in medicine, informed consents, right? Educating your patients. And not having a vested interest in the treatment. Because if I get paid X number of dollars for everyone I put on a ketogenic diet, then all of a sudden I lost credibility. So I think there's a lot of that happening. A lot of doctors, I think, are doing soul searching right now and saying, gosh, what am I doing here? Because the system is based on volume and repeat business. So when you get out of the system, a lot of us have gone into direct primary care, which I'm betting if I can invest an hour in your life, I think I can make you live longer and be healthier and not have to call me every week or not have diabetic ulcers and possibly mood improvement like what we're seeing, and possibly preventing these diagnoses that we're all afraid of. We're afraid of getting dementia, we're afraid of getting Parkinson's, we're afraid of mental illness and not being in our right mind. Say, okay, ones that we can intervene and prevent those things or delay it for 10 years or 15 or 20 years. So I'm hopeful I wasn't hopeful for a long time because it just seemed like we're up against powerful entities. No question about it, right? The messaging, the misinformation, when people, like just recently, just this week, that Holcomb and Malcolm Kendrick, they just got an apology letter from a newspaper that was disparaging them over their stance on statin drugs. But the judge threw the case out, and then now they're getting paid damages for what they went through over the last 3 years. Tim Noakes, Gary Fedke, they all went through heck, but they could have stopped and said, forget it, I'm just going to retire, but they didn't. So I think we have an obligation and a responsibility now to say, okay, here's my patient's experience, here's Hannah's experience, argue with me that that's not true. And I think what we have to do is just like with faith, you go, okay, you don't believe my faith, you don't believe this book I'm basing my faith on, hear this person's story and explain it to me, right? What's your alternative that you're happy and enjoying life now, right? Could there have been other factors? Sure, there possibly could have been other factors, but it sounds like you weren't going through major trauma. You didn't have, you made some changes. And also, I think the important thing is having a sense of community. So when Metabolic Mind is helping people, that community grows and grows and grows, because suffering from mental illness, when you get better, you want to reach out and help everyone. That's why I'm excited about this movement that you have. And when you realize we have cancer therapies that are doing metabolic health, we have, diabetes, hypertension, all these other things, you go, okay, it's the same root cause, right? It comes back to the mitochondrial function and brain function. So I'm sorry for the long answer, but I think there is hope that enough people are saying, you know what, Brian, help me out. I feel like garbage every day. I don't want to live like this anymore. Can you help me? And when you have hope, that changes everything, right? Because if they say, oh, you're never going to get better, this is your life from now on, you go, okay, so for a month I'm stable and I start doing all these plans, then I just go into a major depression or I get manic, and then how am I gonna, be in a job or people are watching me all the time. And so, I think once you get on the other side and you can help other people over, that's gonna keep you because you're getting so many good chemicals like oxytocin, which is the love chemical, because you're helping people and you're dedicated to a cause. And I think there's so many of us in the United States, in the world right now, who don't really have a cause. We're just like what you are doing. You're going through the motions, you're surviving, and there's nothing where you go, this is my passion, this is what I love. And when people get that, they do so much better. And for my patients, my patients on the first visit, I'll go, what do you do for fun? And then they look at me like, what are you talking about? Like fun? I'm surviving right now. I got 3 kids. I got a husband who's a jerk, and I got all these, and so find your fun sometimes. It can't all be work. At some point you have to say, I enjoy helping other people or watching the joy you get from watching these women change their life by sewing, right? And that you're a part of that. And when you see that, I mean, there's there's nothing better. So I think if we all get more positive and try to help each other and not be offended by everything, I think you just live a better life.
Absolutely. I think that's the key, having this community and being able to uplift, inspire, and support one another, and then hopefully organize systematically as well to change these systems. Because I'd like to think that people are inherently good, and yes, our system has become flawed, but once we find better ways, that can all be changed, and maybe it'll take a grassroots movement and communities coming together to rally and advocate for that. But I'd like to have hope for, a brighter future for our healthcare system as well.
And that's why your story is so important, because people say, well, Hannah had, cycling bipolar I, you had all these things, and you go through life and you can lose hope and you get hospitalized. Like, someone's going through that right now, and they're going to hear this, or a family member's going to say, you know what, listen to this podcast, right? Jules, when I met him, he said, your podcast saved my life, because Tro and I were talking to someone who had, bipolar I 5 years ago, and someone gave him the podcast to listen to. You go, wow, that's pretty amazing that you can have that impact. So that's why I'm excited to hear you share your story, because it's not how many listeners we have, it's if we reach the right people who need it, who need that message, who are struggling right now. Because some of those are going to be at that 32% of doctors who go, you know what, life's not worth living, you're right, let's just go give you an injection, or you could go to peace. And you go, wait a minute, you're 22 years old and you think that's the approach we need to take? I mean, we need to step back and see what we're doing. And you're part of that solution and saying, okay, there is hope. There are things we can do. Why don't we try tweaking this? Can we try tweaking? And I think it's so important that you're saying you could do it from a vegan or a vegetarian standpoint. You could be a carnivore and do it. It's like, okay, there's no judgment on what you're doing. What works for you? It's your nutrition and your brain energy, right? So what works for you, great. If it's not everyone has to be Sean Baker, not everyone has to be vegan. You go, okay, what can I be in the middle somewhere and do these things? And so I love this conversation, because I think it's so important that we keep an open mind. Go, okay, instead of saying that's working for you, but I don't agree with you because I don't like that approach, and say, okay, why is it working for you? Okay, good. Now I can use that for my other friend over here who needs it, right? So we can figure it out. And I think we all agree, no matter what end of the spectrum on, let's get rid of all the processed food and junk stuff and artificial colors and plastics that we're eating and all that stuff. And let's focus on real nutrition. And then we can and get our life in order, help other people. This is what's going to make everything better. It's not going to come from the American Medical Association or the American Diabetes Association. Not going to come from them, because they have too many vested interests. So you can't expect something from people who have vested. I mean, it's a hard thing, but that's the kind of the reality. I think when more people see the reality and go, okay, I'm not just going to take things that, because this big government body says it's true. Like, okay, let's look at their data they're basing that on. It's like very not sound, So your story is going to reach more people than these big organizations will, because people have lost trust. And that's what it comes down to. It's like, I have to trust you. And when we were talking, I was thinking about it, because if I have someone who's, for instance, paranoid, and I say, well, you're paranoid. Here, take this pill. This will make you feel better. Do you think that person's going to trust me? No, they're paranoid. So they think I'm out to get them. So it's a hard thing. But if we can get them a little bit better, say, let's just work on nutrition first and see what we can do, under the close eye of a psychiatrist, of course. And then they give up their soda, and guess what? Their brain starts getting better. They can think again. They're not always in this state of agitation. And so it's pretty amazing what we can do. So to answer your question again, I do have hope that people like you, Metabolic Mind, just that they're doing research right now on this, that we're going to publish data after data after, and I think it's it's going to be undeniable at some point. I think it is already, but I think in the future there's going to be such great studies and testimonies and life stories, and you reaching out to the community. Speaking of which, if people want to track you down or follow you, how do they find you?
The best thing is for them to visit Metabolic Mind, because we just have so many resources. I do write articles regularly for the blog, and then we have a YouTube channel where both Dr. Brett Schur and I interview different people and do video content. So that's the best place to find us.
Yeah, it's such a great resource. Everyone, go check it out. We'll put a link to it. You could just click on it if you want to. But Hannah, thanks so much for sharing your story. Thanks for all you're doing, and for giving people hope. I think we all agree, if you have hope, you don't give up, because there's hope. When you have no hope, then you give up. So anyone listening, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, and listen to this over and over again, right? If you need it right now, if you're going through the pit, if you're going through the mud, if you think there's no hope, that things aren't going to get better, that you screwed up your life so bad that you can't get out of this addiction, there's hope. People have done it. You're not the first one, and you're not the only one. So get involved in a community, find a community of people that are going to support you and help you and love you when you're in the pit. Because once you get out of the pit, those are going to be lifelong relationships. So listen to Hannah and what she has to say.
You.
Hey,
I'll also say there's quite a few success stories on the Metabolic Mind website from individuals with all different diagnoses, whether it's major depression, anorexia, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia. We're seeing metabolic therapies be effective for all these different types of psychiatric conditions. And just like me, when people experience this kind of healing, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And so people become incredibly passionate about sharing this form of treatment. So if you're looking for more inspiration, please do visit and hear other people's stories as well.
awesome. Awesome. Hannah, thanks so much for joining me early in the morning. Have a great weekend. And I'm really looking forward to getting this one out.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information. And hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.